Welcome to episode 2 of this little mini-series where I try and figure out what romantasy is as a genre and whether I enjoy it by reading the first 12 Fairyloot romantasy picks. So in episode 1, I gave an introduction to this challenge, explained why I'm doing this, what it means to me, what I hope to achieve. And I also read the first 3 books from the subscription, which were from April, May, and June 2024, which were Lore of the Wilds by Annalisa Brana, A Curse of Blood and Wolves by Melissa McTernan, and Nectar of the Wicked by Ella Fields. So if you guys did miss episode 1 and you need to catch up, it is linked down below along with the playlist for this series, which you can watch at your convenience. But in episode 2, I'm going to be reading the next 3 books from the subscription, which are the Wren in the Holly Library by Kay Lind from July 2024, Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen from August 2024, and The Half King by Melissa Landers from September 2024. Now, a few predictions before we go in. There is one of these books that I'm quite excited to read, one I think I'm really not going to enjoy, and one that could go either way. So the one that could go either way is The Half King by Melissa Landers. Everything I've heard about this is pretty average, but that to me means that I could love it or I could hate it. It's truly like there's no way to predict it. The one that I think I'm very much not going to enjoy is Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen. This one is a reverse harem book, a why choose romance, which is my least favorite romance trope. I'm at the point now where I don't even attempt to read this trope because I've tried it in so many iterations and literally never enjoyed it. But the girlies who read this were eating this series up, so I'm intrigued to see if there's something a little bit different about this one that has everyone hooked. And then the book that I'll be starting with is the one that I'm the most interested in, which is the Wren in the Holly Library by Kay Lind. This one is a contemporary or urban fantasy romance about a girl who is a master thief who has been assigned a job to steal a diamond from a library. However, when she attempts that, she's caught by the monster who owns the house, who offers her a job given her specific skill set that she actually didn't know that she had, which is to pass magical wards. So this one is inspired by Beauty and the Beast. There is no real reason why this is the one that I'm most excited for, aside from the fact that the synopsis just generally sounds a little bit more interesting to me than the other 2 books that we're reading. So fingers crossed that this is a hit, because I mean, based on where we ended the last episode, it's not looking so good. But as I said in the last episode, those books in particular were ones that I didn't have high hopes for, so the result that we had was unsurprising to me. I am just about a third of the way through the Wren and the Holly Library. I have made it to the beginning of part 3, which is page 125. So this is mainly told from the main character's perspective. It is in third person, but more closely following the main character, Kiers. She's Kiers. She said it's like Pierce, but with a K, so Kiers, I guess. And then at the end of every section, you have an interlude, which is from the perspective of a side character that has been relevant to that particular section, and it's just like 2 or 3 pages to fill in like a little nook in the plot. So far, I would say that my prediction for this one is holding strong. Out of the 3.33 books that I've read so far from the Romantasy subscription for this series, this is the one that I am currently enjoying the most. I had nothing to go on but the synopsis. I think I remember somebody commenting and saying that it was Shadowhunter-esque, but that's literally the only preconceptions I had going into this one. And it does still have its flaws, but it is a contemporary fantasy story that is set in New York City after a kind of treaty has been signed or agreed upon between the monsters and the humans of the world. So the monsters are paranormal supernatural creatures, so there's like werewolves, vampires, wraiths, nymphs, mare, like the whole bag. There's trolls as well, and then there's also different creatures that humans aren't aware of, and the male main character in here, Graves, is one of those. So the main character has been assigned by somebody to steal a diamond. She breaks into this house, she gets the diamond, and then Graves finds her there and is like, how did you get into my house, because it's warded. Now the main character is confused about this because they've always been told that monsters are a different species, but they don't have magic. Like, monsters and magic are very different. But what Graves is telling her is that not only is magic actually real and he is a more magical creature than a monster, but also she potentially has magic herself, or an immunity to magic where it cannot affect her, and that is the reason why she can pass through wards. So Graves sees an opportunity here, and he hires Kiers to steal something valuable that he would like from a very secure building that belongs to people called the Men of Valor, which they don't seem like very nice people, gotta be honest. They are essentially allied against humans and the treaty that humans and monsters have. So there is a lot of prejudice in this world regarding monsters, because from what I can gather, there was a big societal collapse when monsters came out of the shadows and into the forefront and kind of announced their presence, and it resulted in a lot of destruction. And when society was kind of rebuilt, when they regained calm, the price of everything hiked up, so it increased the amount of people who lived in poverty. There's lots of food shortages. Not everybody has mobile phones anymore because they can't afford to pay for the plans, because the repair of the cell towers caused like a big rise in prices. So it's a little bit apocalyptic. It's kind of probably more resembling our world, but there is a lot of damage to the infrastructure, which has mainly impacted humans. I do find it interesting how K.A. Lind has interwoven the kind of real life setting of New York with these fantastical creatures. So one of the werewolf packs, like, they originate from the like Irish mafia present in New York City, and they've kind of been integrated into the werewolves, and one of the people who was part of the mafia is now responsible for the werewolf packs. So I like the little ways that things like that have been interwoven, but something that I don't like is that it is a little bit info dumpy. Like, when we meet a new character like that guy who's the leader of the werewolves, we'll have like a page of, here is why he was influential in this war, this is what he's done, this is where he came from, this is what he's doing now, and it's all just a lot. Like, honestly, I'm not retaining it, and I feel like the world building is moving quite quickly in that regard, because the very first chapter, like where we start this book, is when Kias is breaking into this house. So we don't have any lead up to it. We are learning about her, about the world, about the situation as we are thrown right into the plot. And because of that, I do feel like the world building is coming a little bit too hard and too fast. I love me like a big exposition at the beginning of a book that's like, this is the world, this is why it is how it is, as we kind of just get to know the characters more slowly. But this is proving to be a little bit more fast paced. Now, while I am enjoying it more than I have enjoyed any of the others that we've read so far, I can tell it's not going to be my new favorite book, or at least I'm not getting those vibes from it right now. I am open to the possibility of the romantic relationship, which I'm assuming is going to develop between Kias and Graves. I like his vibe. We found out now, I won't tell you what kind of supernatural creature he is, but I found out kind of what his niche is in this world, and that's definitely something that I'm excited to explore. And I like the kind of chemistry that they've got going on. He is very blunt. He is a man of few words, and Kias is constantly asking him questions, and his number one thing is privacy. Like, I want my privacy, I don't want to tell you anything. And obviously this is a story that is inspired by Beauty and the Beast, with him being the beast figure, and then Kias has to go and live with him so that she can train to complete this job that he set her, which if she does manage to complete it, then she's asked for a lot of money. It will essentially assure her own safety and the safety of her friends and her like found family. I like this dynamic they have between them. It's feeling a little bit like a slow burn, because now, like a third of the way through the book, nothing has really happened. They haven't even touched, aside from like a little bit of tension built during sparring. So I do feel like we are going to have a little bit of a slow burn in here, which I definitely prefer, and we're going to be slowly ramping up that sexual tension. Unlike Law of the Wilds, which was also a slow burn, I see potential for romance within the text and have seen potential for romance from the beginning. So I feel like as this does start to develop more romantically and things start to heat up and maybe it gets a little bit more explicit, I don't know, I feel like it's going to feel a little bit more natural and seamless in this world than I felt that it did in Law of the Wild. So far so good. I'm hoping from the next 200 or so pages to be a little bit more absorbed and to get a little bit more grounded in the world, because now I'm reading it, I'm enjoying it, but I could definitely be more immersed. I'm very, very close to being 3/4 of the way through this book. I have 102 pages left. So I felt like you guys would do an update, but I actually don't have too much to say. I'm still really enjoying it, and it is still the one that I've enjoyed the most out of the 3 books that I've read previously. I do think that it is the best of the bunch so far, although I do see why a lot of people would really like Nectar of the Wicked. Even though I had my own like issues with that one, I do feel like it was pretty decent. The problem with this one though for me right now, while I'm still enjoying it the most and I'm still continuously enjoying it while I'm reading it, is that I feel like it's holding me at arm's length. Like, I'm really struggling to get immersed, and I feel like an element of that is that a lot of the world building in here is kind of reliant on the reader being familiar with New York, being familiar with a contemporary world. So it's only really telling us how it is different from a regular, like our regular world, which makes sense obviously when you have a contemporary setting, but I feel like the contemporary setting has been chosen so that the world building doesn't have to be done, in quotation marks. And the book is suffering for that because it all just feels very surface level to me. We have quite a vast cast of characters in here. Not all of them are main characters and not all of them are relevant all of the time, but we have a lot of characters playing specific little parts in this story. An example of how I kind of enjoy what's going on, but I don't really care about what's going on, is that one of the driving forces for the main character agreeing to this deal with Graves is that her two best friends are at risk, and if she completes this job, Graves is going to pay her a lot of money, which will assure her safety for herself and her friends. Now, these people are also her found family, so like they're the people that she cares about the most in the world. To protect them, she's kind of put them into hiding, so we see them in the first couple of chapters of this book, but now at page 278, I haven't seen them in at least, I want to say 200 pages. And so for me, like, I don't care about her friends. I don't care that they're her found family. If one of them died in this book, I'm sure she would be devastated, but honestly, I truly could care less. And for me, that makes her, it doesn't make her actions less believable, but I have to believe in her actions and I have to feel the things that the main characters feel in for me to truly be invested in a story. And in terms of the world building and how I feel like it's kind of suffered the most in this book, is some of the concepts we have in here, like, they make a lot of sense. Like I said about how we have certain elements of modern society that have been melded with this monster society to create a new equilibrium for the world as a aftermath of this monster war that changed how society operates. Like, makes sense, really like that. But then I just feel like some of the terminology used for some of the elements of this world is so unsophisticated. Like, the war is called the Monster War. The treaty that ended the Monster War is called the Monster Treaty. The catchphrase that we use to remind ourselves that monsters are not magic is monsters, not magic. And there is another instance, I'll see if I can find it at some point and then let you guys know, but there is another instance of something like that is so like literally named that it doesn't feel believable. Like, obviously when we name things, and if you really break down the etymology of some words, like necklace, it's a lace for your neck. Things like that are really literal, and it's only when you break them down that you kind of realize that. But I also feel like things like treaties are given more elaborate names to make them seem like really bureaucratic and official, as opposed to like literally just naming it's a treaty to do with monsters. So I feel like some elements just could have done with a little bit more development or a little bit more creativity to make them feel a little bit more realistic and help me immerse myself in the story. I do enjoy the writing style in here, but I don't feel like it's quite as descriptive as I need to really sink into a story, because that's pretty key for me actually. Like, a really good writing style that I enjoy and compels me, and also really good world building, I'd say are probably the most important things to me when getting immersed in a fantasy novel. I do really like that this book is plot forward though. There is definitely a romantic connection between our main characters, and their relationship is, I would say, inherently romantic, but it isn't always romantic. Like, they can be in the same room as each other and focus on other things apart from like how attractive they find each other, or ruminating on the like altercation they've had recently, which we have had some spice in this book already at about like the halfway point. So I like that they have a romantic connection, but it isn't consuming the story and consuming their relationship, because they're both incredibly driven, ambitious people. Graves especially has a history that is illustrated throughout the course of this book with various people who have been tied to him romantically, of letting people kind of, not throwing them under the bus, but letting them slide by the wayside when he is in pursuit of his goals. So he's very goal oriented, he's very ambitious, he's very focused, he's lived a mostly isolated existence, and so he mainly relies on himself and his instincts. And while he is interested in people romantically and sexually, like, that doesn't consume his focus most of the time. Like, he is generally focused on his goals. And our main female character, Kias, is somebody who has been in survival mode for most of her life. So her main driving force in this book is to complete this job to get paid so that she can live a life of safety and security that she hasn't had up until this point. She has also had in her history, which this is explained very early on, she did lose somebody who she was romantically connected to. And so this has put her off seeking like actual relationships, even though she is still interested in pursuing things a little bit more casually. For these two characters, characters. It's more like they are inexplicably drawn to each other and they enjoy each other's company and find each other attractive, more than that they're obsessed with each other and it's all consuming. Although I do feel like, based on the themes of this book so far and the tangents that we keep following in some parts, that there is going to be something a little bit more mystical tying them together. But overall, I just feel like this world needs a little bit more description and a little bit more exploration and exposition for me to truly love this book. But I am enjoying it a lot right now. So, I mean, I recently read this Woven Kingdom by Tahara Murphy, where I loved the writing style, but the plot was going absolutely nowhere. It was just these two characters pining for each other for like 80% of the book, and then in the last 20% it introduced like a bunch of stuff that I loved and got me really psyched for the sequel. So even though I'm almost done with this book and I'm enjoying it but not obsessed with it yet, like we still have almost 30% for my feelings to change. So I have finished the Wren in the Holly Library by Kay Lind, and I'm very sad to say that I gave this one 3 stars. Now 3 stars is not a bad rating for me. 3 stars means that I enjoyed it, but it usually means that I had issues with it, or I didn't enjoy it enough to continue on with the series, if it is indeed a series, which this one is. And this is one of the worst kind of books for me, where there were elements of it that I really enjoyed and elements of it that I really did not. So I have to make a decision between whether I would like to read the sequel to this or whether I would not, whether I want to keep this book, whether I unhaul it. And I honestly would much rather books were either terrible or really good, because I can't make decisions to save my life. So when the decision is difficult, I struggle. And the issue with this for me was just that I felt like the decisions that the characters made and the events of this plot very much felt like the things that should happen in a book, or the things that characters should do, instead of what they organically would have done in that moment. Like kind of going through the motions of what a book should be, instead of actually taking into account what would be realistic within the scope of this plot, the scope of this world, and also what the characters would also choose to do. Like I said to you in the last update, the main character Case has this found family element that I really don't care about, because we saw them in the beginning. They were put into hiding, and then aside from the fact that she thinks about them regularly, we don't see them again until much later in the book. And pretty much immediately after I had said that to you, they were reintroduced into the story in a position where they were in danger. And lo and behold, I didn't care that they were in danger, because I've just been told that she feels this way about them. Like, I haven't been shown their bond. I haven't been shown their friendship. I just have to take it on faith that she really cares about these people, which is fine, except when it comes to these instances where they're in danger, like I don't care. Like, I don't feel her torment when she's making decisions that inhibit the plot based on her connection to these people. Like, I need to believe the connection to these people to kind of forgive the fact that her actions are detrimental to the plot. So many things throughout here fell into that kind of a pattern of what characters should do to service a average plot, as opposed to anything organic that would make this book kind of stand out from a lot of books of its kind. While it is a little bit different in its setting and a little bit different in the fact that it's like a contemporary fantasy or an urban fantasy, skewing a little bit into paranormal as opposed to straight up high fantasy, it still fell into a lot of common tropes that we see in fantasy romance, such as things that we see in A Court of Mist and Fury, which, as we know, is every fantasy romance author's blueprint. And I just felt like this book could have really stood out on its own. It could have been different, but the characters were kind of forced into this mold of having to go through the motions of a plot that felt kind of inauthentic to them. I did have issues with the world building earlier on as well, and I do think that there were elements of this where the world building was really good. This borrows a lot from the Tuatha De Danann, and if I don't know if I said that correctly, but essentially the Fae from Irish folklore, and Irish folklore is brought into this like regularly and interspersed throughout the plot in different ways, and that stuff was really good, and how that came into play. Although, because I felt like we did a lot of telling and not showing, I felt like some of the plot reveals also didn't feel quite right within the scenes that they were in. But the way that folklore was kind of woven throughout the plot, like, was fine. But I felt like in any instance where the world building was something the author created, like, it really fell flat, like the monster treaty and the monster war. And then we have this kind of like rich Irish folklore woven throughout here as well. So it was a very mixed bag. Like, I really liked the themes of the plot twist, not necessarily their execution. I liked the use of the Irish folklore and legend. I really liked the main characters, although the chemistry between them I think fell a little bit flat after the first 20 to 40%. I really liked the setting of this altered New York City, but I think in terms of the plot and the character development, we felt more like we were going through the motions, and so I just kind of wasn't immersed. So in terms of the spice rating on this, I would give it a solid 3 chili peppers, and this I think is my personal preference when it comes to spice levels in fantasy romance. So in this we had 2 intimate scenes. They were relatively explicit, so we weren't dancing around terminology, but outside of these 2 particular scenes, like, the book wasn't overtly romantic. It wasn't focused on the romance much more than it was focused on the plot. They were kind of interwoven, and it wasn't like the romance and their sexual tension or their relationship consumed the entire thing. The book was still very much plot focused, and I would consider this to be a book that is more plot than it is romance. And this is the kind of like fantasy romance that I like to read in terms of that ratio between the romance and the plot. So the romance is very much a part of the story, and some of the decisions the characters make is based on their relationship to each other, but their thoughts of how much they want to tear each other's clothes off does not consume like every inner monologue we have to sit through with them. That's something that we've discovered from reading this book. At least we'll see how it compares if we find any more books from this subscription that are around a similar point on the like little spice scale that I've made. But at this point I'm very, very torn about this book, because the elements of it that I did enjoy, I really enjoyed, but the elements that I didn't enjoy really frustrated me. I believe the sequel to this one is out in June, so I have a couple of months to think about it. I do think realistically, while in this very moment I'm torn, by the time June rolls around, I'm not sure that I will still have this level of indecision. I'm pretty sure that by the time we do get to June, and I've had a little bit of distance from this book, I'll probably deem it not worth continuing. But this one was a little bit frustrating for me because I felt like it had so much potential and it just didn't quite get there. It was so close, but just not quite a 4-star read for me. I think in terms of how much I enjoy these books, we're kind of looking at anything from a 3, a 3.5, which I would say this is a 3.5, up to a 5-star for books to be considered a success. When I did this kind of challenge with the Goldsboro Science Fiction and Fantasy Fellowship, I did give the requirement, I guess, that every book that I read, for it to be considered a success and for me to keep the subscription, I had to rate half of the books 4 stars or higher. And while that does still seem like logically sound to me, given at least half of the books a 4 or 5-star rating, I actually went back to my ratings for last year, just in general, over all of the books that I read, and I actually only rated 40% of everything that I read in 2024 4 or 5 stars. And that does also take into account the fact that I choose some of the books that I read, and I read them intentionally, and they're sequels to things that I've enjoyed, which obviously results in a much higher rating. So I would say for this, we're looking kind of for maybe a 30 to 40% 4 and 5-star ratio. I don't foresee there being 5 stars in this series, if I'm being honest, just because the amount of 5 stars that I have in a year, I think I had 5 last year. So the likelihood of finding one here is very, very small. And I would say that, I mean, at most we're likely to find 1. So we're looking for, I mean, if we're talking about 40%, we're looking for 4 to 5 books to be 4 stars or higher. Fingers crossed. I am just generally incredibly picky though, so I do realize that my expectations are potentially a little bit high. And actually, if I'm being honest, it's probably not going to be looking good for the next book that I'm going to be sampling, which is Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen. Now, the reason I say sampling for this one specifically is that I was going to unhaul this book when I received it, because it features a trope that I just don't like, and I've tried so many books with this trope and I just don't like them, and that is the why choose trope, or reverse harem. So essentially a female main character with multiple love interests. And I was just going to unhaul it because I've unhauled the rest of the reverse harem books that I owned from when I was sampling like different types of romance to figure out what I liked. But then I was like, no, I'll keep it so I can talk about it in this series, but maybe I won't read it and I'll talk about why I'm not going to read it. And then I felt like if we're really trying all of the books in this subscription, I do feel like I have to give this a try. The reason why I stopped trying reverse harem is because I felt like it was insulting to people people who love this trope for me to keep trying books that I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna like just to say that I don't like them and essentially bashing your favorite trope. So that's the reason why I decided to unhaul everything that I had that I knew was reverse harem and move on and just not read the trope in the future. But just for the sake of this challenge, I am going to be trying Bonded by Thorns. So this one is it a Beauty and the Beast retelling? So we're now going for 2 Beauty and the Beast retellings back to back, although the Wren in the Holly Library specified it was inspired by as opposed to being like an actual retelling. This one at the bottom of the synopsis says that it is a spicy Beauty and the Beast retelling filled with enchanted fae, morally grey characters, a sinfully hot villain, and a princess who's found her prince charming. The love interests in here are 4 fae princes, which I do like fae romances, and the main character is an awkward bookworm, which tracks with a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I'll tell you a little bit more about the plot when I know, but essentially the reason why I don't like reverse harem or why choose is because in case you maybe noticed, with this one, I love character development. I need character development to feel a connection to the characters, obviously, and the story. And I just feel like this book is 370 pages. We have 4 love interests in here. If I can't feel a connection to this guy when there's only one of him in a book of the same length, and one of my main issues in here is character development, then the likelihood of there being enough character development in here for me personally to feel connected enough to 4 different love interests as well as a main character and as well as any potential side characters we may have that service this plot to a degree where I actually care about the relationships and I'm invested in them is very, very slim. And I have not found a single book with this trope where I felt like the level of character development we have is significant enough for me to care. So that's the reason why I gave up on this trope altogether. I've heard glowing reviews for this, not necessarily in that it's phenomenal, but I've seen people blasting through this series like cannot get enough, reading them back to back to back. And so maybe this one is different. Maybe it has a different brand of crack sprinkled throughout the pages. I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna see if I can get on that hype train, but I wanted to let you guys know straight off that like the chances of me enjoying this are slim, and so I'm giving myself like full license to DNF if it gets to a point in this book where I'm like there's literally just no point, like, because I'm just not going to enjoy this one. I just made it about 1/3 of the way into, is it called Bonded by Thorns? I keep forgetting the name of this book. I'm pretty sure that the series is called Beasts of Briar, and that's what I keep thinking it's called. I'm pretty sure it's Bonded by Thorns though. And I'm on page 126 and I'm not hating it. I'm really, really not hating it. The writing style is definitely addictive, which is definitely the thing that is keeping me hooked in here. I will say though that at the point that I'm up to, while we have now been introduced to all of the Fae Princes who are going to be the love interests of this series, nothing has happened with them. So because it's specifically the trope that I don't like, my feelings could change a little bit when things actually start to ramp up and become romantic and spicy. And this is, it shocked me a little bit because it's different in tone than I expected it to be and different in setting, but also it is so much a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Like, we are hitting all of the plot beats, but while this is more closely following the story of Beauty and the Beast, it also has a lot of the elements that ACOTAR drew on from Beauty and the Beast as well. Whereas in the Wren and the Holly Library, we pretty much just have a girl who is really into books, who finds this guy in a library who a lot of people don't like, so he's a beast. This is a much more literal retelling, but we're following a girl in the modern day Pacific Northwest, which I didn't know because looking at her outfit on this cover, which I mean it does make sense, but I just automatically assumed it was a high fantasy. We also have 2 pretty nice maps in this. I don't know if it's just this edition, I'm assuming it's in all of them, but we have a map of the fairylands, and we also have, so this is like the first thing I saw in this book, was a map of Orca Cove, which is the town where the main character Rosalina is from. But still,
looking at this when I saw it, still thought that it was a high fantasy world. Everything looks like it's made out of wood. Everything looks a little bit ramshackle. The roads look like dirt paths as opposed to actual paved roads. But yeah, it's set in the modern day and she works in a bookstore. Her boss hates her. It's like the classic Belle thing. Everyone in town thinks that she's weird. Her father is obsessed with Fae and he's hunting for the Fae lands because her mother disappeared like so ever many years ago, and her father thinks that she's gone to the realm of the Fae. So he's traveling all over the world looking for signs of the Fae, and everyone thinks that he's mad. She has this abusive, like horrible red flag of a man that is an ex-boyfriend of hers who went to university, and he comes back and he asks her to marry him, like even though they haven't gotten back together or anything. He's a walking red flag. And I know that we're setting him up to be the Gaston character who is also a walking red flag, but because this is set in the modern day and the like conflicted feelings the main character has about him when some of the stuff that he does is atrocious, like physical and emotional, mental abuse. Like she hasn't said a single nice thing about him apart from that he's hot. So I don't understand how he's gaslit her and she's gaslit herself so much to even have questionable feelings about him, because I haven't heard a single good thing about him apart from that he's the best looking guy in town. When he proposes to her, he's waiting for her answer when this guy comes in who I think he's a hunter, and he says that he's found her father's jacket in the woods. Her father's just come back from Jordan, I think, and he said he's going to explore the forest to look for the realm of the Fae. And so herself and the Gaston guy, who I think is called Lucas, go into the forest and they end up climbing through like this bramble patch into the land of the Fae, where they're immediately attacked by, I can't remember if they're goblins or trolls. I think they're trolls. And the main character falls off a cliff. Lucas abandons her and she ends up being taken to this castle that is wrapped up in like thorns and briars and vines. It's called like the Queen's Castle, but the Queen went missing a long time ago. Hint, hint, wink, wink, because that's obvious how that's going to develop in the future. And the 4 Fae princes are in residence there, but they're cursed. So they're all shapeshifters, which if you remember last episode, that is something else that I don't love, and they all shapeshift into wolves. So I mean, it's not ticking the boxes for me in that regard, but I'm eating it up anyway. And the main guy, I want to say, he's the Winter Prince, is the one who's like has the most dominance over the rest of them, and he is the most beast character, I would say, out of the 4 of them. One of them, the Summer Prince, is a charmer. The Spring Prince is a Mandalorian because he wears a helmet that he can never take off, so he eats alone and nobody's ever seen his face since he was 5 years old. And then the Prince of Autumn is a scholar. When she gets to this castle, like in Beauty and the Beast, she finds her father and she offers herself as a prisoner in exchange for her father's release, and that is how she ends up trapped in this castle with all of these men. Obviously, I know that it's going to be a reverse harem, a white choose, and she's going to be connected to all of them, and I know how that's going to play out in terms of the curse. So right now, I would say it's a little bit too close to Beauty and the Beast for me right now, because we are pretty much like all of the characters of Beauty and the Beast are represented in very similar ways, and the only difference, I guess, is the little spin on the world that we have, the fact that there's 4 Fae princes and they're Fae as opposed to just being like one guy cursed by a witch. So I would definitely like to see some variation from that, something a little bit more interesting and actually unique going into the rest of this book or going into the sequel. But it really is the writing that's keeping me hooked in this. It's just so compelling. The main character is a little bit relatable, and this book is even doing things that I typically don't love, like throwing in modern day references and referencing like popular authors, TV shows, movies, which normally irritates me a little bit just because it throws me out of the story. But I think that up to the point where I'm at anyway, the references that Elizabeth Helen have chosen are a little bit more classic, a little bit more timeless. Like they've referenced James Patterson, who is a very well-known prolific author who will for a very long time be a well-known prolific author. They've also referenced, like very recently, Gone with the Wind, which is once again a classic, timeless movie that will be classic and timeless for many, many years to come. So it's not like really grounding it in a specific like decade or handful of years, like a lot of books do when they constantly reference things like this. One thing that I have picked up on that's really annoyed me is, like I said, our main character, she's from our world. She lives in a very small town, but she's definitely from our modern world. And she doesn't really have a lot going for her. All she does is works at the bookstore constantly because she loves to read. She doesn't really have any friends. She has never lived outside of her town, so she's lived like quite a, not necessarily a sheltered life, but she hasn't had as many life experiences as I would say a lot of people have. And she has read a lot of books though, and she talks about how she's traveled to different worlds because of that. But when she is in this fey castle, she is trying to get through a door. And she's like, oh, I wonder if I can find something to pick the lock. And then she finds something to pick the lock. And she immediately picks the lock. And I'm like, girl, how do you know how to pick a lock? Like, that's just not something you can do. If you hand me a lock pick, I don't know how to pick a lock. I've read about people picking locks in books. I've done it in video games. I've seen it done in movies, but I couldn't do it based on that knowledge because that's something that you have to learn. Yet somehow this girl from the year 2024 who hasn't been outside of her small town where like it would be really obvious if you were a criminal because everyone knows everybody, somehow she knows how to pick a lock. So yeah, that like frustrated me a little bit. It's like I'm willing to overlook it because I'm going into this book just rolling with it and not even expecting to enjoy it at all. But I was like, that was definitely not realistic and you should not be able to pick a lock. But yeah, so far so good, much better than expected. We'll see though if my feelings remain the same once the romance actually properly starts to kick in. I am in the end stretch of this book now. I'm kind of waiting for the action to ramp up actually, thinking about it, because I have 77 pages left, which is about 20%. And if I'm being honest, I am feeling a little bit fatigued. I've just taken a bit of an extended break and got my workout in and had a shower before I settled back down to finish this one before dinner. And I feel like now that it's turned romantic or more romantic and spicy in the second half, I'm not having as much of a good time with it. And it's actually not necessarily because of the trope of like the why choose reverse harem trope. I do really like the voice of the main character in here and what she brings to the story. And I also really liked the setup of this world and the setup of the plot, even though it was nothing original. Like I said, it was hitting a lot of the beats of Beauty and the Beast and also drew a lot of parallels to ACOTAR in that regard. I was still having a really good time with it, and now that it is spicier and it is more romantic, the reason why I'm actually not enjoying it as much is because I just don't like the smut. Some of the words, like the word choices that the authors have chosen for the sex scenes in here are a choice. I've been making a list. I've got 3 of the most offensive words that I've found to share with you guys. The first one is gobbling. Did not enjoy that. Sopping. Interesting choice. The worst by far though was splat. That was like a piece of anatomy that went splat, and not in like it fell from a great height. That's just how the movement of it was described. So yeah, I'm trying to like, I feel like I'm really struggling to work out the choreography of the sex scenes in here, and I'm more confused than anything else, and I'm not enjoying it in the way I feel like you are supposed to enjoy these things in this book. But in terms of it being a why choose, it's not that bad. Like, I'm still having a good time with it. Something that is very common in books with this trope, which is another reason why I don't typically love them, is that everyone has to have a thing, okay? Because you have a lot of men, so we have to differentiate them somehow. So they all have to have a thing. They all have like a different hair color. They all, in this case, they all represent one of the fey courts, but they also have their own personal trauma that the main character has to help them with. And it's just a little bit obvious, a little bit convenient, like, oh, all of these men are tortured. All of these men have this one specific problem each that she can help them with. And it's that kind of formula that I don't love about stories with this trope. That being said, I do find this to be a very enjoyable one. Could it be the best book that I've read in the subscription so far? Maybe. I think it's a shame because I don't like this trope, so my chance of really enjoying this book is relatively slim. But I think if I did enjoy this trope, then this would probably be the best book of the subscription so far. I think it's definitely the most compelling, and I think it has maybe been the most absorbing of the ones that I've read, where even though it isn't perfect, even though it has its flaws, even though it has things that I don't like, it has been the one that has sucked me into the world the easiest and kept me in this world for the longest time. I have finished our second book for this video, which of course is Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen, and I cannot believe that I'm about to say this, guys, but I gave this 4 stars. It was a low 4-star rating, but I gave this book 4 stars. I cannot believe that our first 4-star read for this challenge is coming from the book that I was going to unhaul without reading. Now, regarding that, I do think that if I had unhauled this without reading it, I think I would be fine. I wouldn't regret it. While I did enjoy this book, I don't feel like it added anything to my life in terms of I would have had great regrets had I decided not to read it. And the main reason why I gave this one 4 stars is because of how compelling the narrative was and how much I enjoyed the main character. Now, I do know that this is a spicy fantasy romance, and I think that probability wise, this series is probably going to get smuttier the more it goes on. Like, that is kind of what we would assume from a series like this, right? So she meets all of the characters in this one. You're obviously not going to go 0 to 100, or at least this girl wasn't. But like, the longer the series goes on and the more she becomes familiar with all of these characters, and we know it's a why choose romance, it is assumedly going to have more smut in every book. That is what I would assume anyway. And the smut was actually my least favorite thing about this one. I didn't even mind the fact that there's like multiple love interests, which normally is an issue for me. I just really do not think that the smut was very good at all. I think that one thing that this did for me that other why choose romances haven't, and potentially why I actually liked this one, is that we didn't go from 0 to 100 in this first book. So there are some characters in here, some of the Fae princes, that we have some spicy scenes with. There are some that we have some flirtation with. There are some that we are only just really beginning to establish a friendship with. There are some where we are having more romantic feelings as opposed to sexual feelings. I mean, sexual feelings are still there, but they're not the driving force between the interactions. So we had a variety of different types of relationships, and it also didn't resolve in an I love you with everyone. We didn't go from a place of not knowing who these guys were to we're going to attempt to live happily ever after all together in this castle. Like, that is not the point at the end of this book. And I think in previous why choose romances that I've read, that has been the end point, and I just can't believe it. Like, it's just not believable that in 300, I mean, I read a novella once where that happened that was like 200 pages, but in 200, 300, 400 pages, even Den of Vipers was like, what, 600? I can't believe that you can go from not knowing any of these men at all to essentially marrying them and living happily ever after. Like, it's just not believable to me, and this book didn't do that, which is why I feel like it worked for me, where so many reverse harems have not. Part of my issue with this, in terms of it being a why choose and why chooses in general, is that I do have a favourite in here, and there are some that I don't care about, and I don't want to read about romantic relationships and smut with characters that I literally don't care about at all, when I very much have a clear preference. And if you want to know my preference is in here, I mean, I kind of have two. My favorite is Kel, who is, as I mentioned at the beginning, he's like the most dominant one, like the most beast-like of them all. He's the leader of the four. And then we have Dayton, who is the summer prince, and he is like the flirtatious scoundrel of the group. The other two, I would say, one is the honorable knight and the other one is like the more reserved scholar, and those are the two that I'm not as interested in. And I do feel like actually we progress the relationships potentially a little bit more with the ones that I was interested in this one, although there was some smut like related to other characters as well in here. Something else that I did enjoy about this is that I was very much expecting it to resolve the whole Beauty and the Beast plotline within this one book, and we actually had some stirrings of, guys, can I spoil Beauty and the Beast for you? Like, is that a thing that can still be spoiled? Essentially, near the end of the movie, there's this big mob of people who try and storm the castle, led by Gaston. I'm sorry, I am spoiling Beauty and the Beast for you right now. I expected all of that to unravel in this book, and while we have some kind of like mob stirrings going on in here, we do not complete the full timeline. Like, we don't complete like the romantic arcs, we don't resolve all of the problems in this book. That is very much going to lead into the other books, and I really liked that because I felt like it made it a little bit less predictable. It also not necessarily introduced different conflicts, but gave more unique elements of this book that weren't directly pulled from Beauty and the Beast a little bit of time to flourish, and also gives you a reason to kind of read on because it doesn't wrap up the whole arc within this one book. That being said, it then also leads the rest of the series to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling instead of, like, for example, ACOTAR, just the first book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then the series like moves on from that in the later books. So I'm wondering whether the whole series kind of resolves the way Beauty and the Beast piece does, or whether it kind of moves past that and becomes more unique as the series goes on. Before we answer the question on everyone's minds, and by everyone's minds I mean me, in terms of spiciness, I would give this a 4 chili pepper rating. I would say that it is quite sexual in nature throughout the entirety of the book, but is not quite as domineering or overtly present as it was in some of the earlier books we read, like A Curse of Blood and Wolves and also Nectar of the Wicked. It's just slightly more subtle than that, but where we do have sex scenes, they are quite lengthy and very graphic where they do occur, and I do foresee this series getting more spicy with every installment because that just kind of makes sense to me with where we're going. Now the question on everyone's minds is, am I going to continue on with this series? I don't know. Typically with a 4-star, it would be a guaranteed yes. I can foresee myself continuing on with this series. I would just be worried that it would get smuttier and smuttier and smuttier as it goes on. And with me just not enjoying the smut in this pretty much at all, that's not something I'm really interested in from the sequels. Like, I want more plot, I want more angst, I want more fighting between the princes. That is the vibes that I'm in here for, not smut. You know? So I'd be interested to see if you guys could let me know if I'm right. Does it get smuttier with each installment, or do we stay with like a 2 to 3 spicy scene per book kind of ratio? And then also Fairyloot have literally, I think it was about a week before I'm filming this, they put the next 2 books or the remaining 3 books, I think it must have been the remaining 3, right, up for sale. But I don't really want special editions of this series. I'm not invested enough to want more hardbacks and to take up hardback space, which is super limited in my home. So I'd actually rather have paperbacks of these, and I'm not sure if they're even out in paperback yet. And they're also not available on any of these services where I get ebooks from. So they're not on KU, they're not on Libby, they're not on Everand. So potentially I could see if my library has the hardbacks. Otherwise it would be a case of waiting for the paperbacks before I do continue on with this series. But overall, I literally cannot believe that Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen is our first 4-star of this challenge. So now, the book that I was the most excited about wasn't exactly a flop, but didn't love it. The one that I was the least excited about is the highest rated one we've had so far. So where is that going to leave The Half King by Melissa Landers? I cannot remember what this is about, like literally at all. I remember it sounding intriguing when I read the synopsis in the unboxing video when I received this, and this one is the book from September 2024. But I have heard very, very average reviews, not negative, not positive, just straight down the middle, like it's a book that I read kind of reviews. And you know what? That's not putting me off, because a book that I read towards the tail end of last year and really, really enjoyed, which is 5 Broken Blades by Mike Holland, also received very like meh reviews. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but let us kind of see what kind of romance we're getting into here. Interesting. Oh, I remember this one. This is to do with bloodlines and also the order of birth. Oh my god, this sounds so good. So in this world, second-born daughters are given to the temples to serve the goddess, and our main character is a terrible oracle. She's called Cerise, and her inability to foretell a single tragedy has brought shame to her family. So she is then given in service to the Half King, who is a firstborn son that bears his bloodline's curse. So in the day he rules, and at night he turns to shadow, and he's destined to vanish completely upon his 21st birthday. And then as they're working together, they start to find out things about themselves and each other. So sounds amazing. We have some really nice character art. I love these end pages in the Fairyloot edition. I also really heavily rely on the end paper art because I'm quite a visual reader, so I like to really imagine the characters. So I love having the Fairyloot editions for like that art, although to be fair, if I'm reading just like a standard Kindle romance, I just look it up on Pinterest, or for like fan casting, or you know, like aesthetic boards, that kind of thing. This one is the longest of all of the books I've read, I think probably so far out of all of them from the Fairyloot subscription, at 474 pages, but actually also has some of the largest text that I've read from this subscription. So wish me luck. I'll be starting it soon, and I do hope that I enjoy this one, because synopsis wise this sounds pretty great. I just want to clarify that I just showed you guys this print for the Half King, and then I looked at it and was like, this looks like the Wren in the Holly Library, and I mean, can confirm, because The foiling on the print matches the foiling on the end papers for this one, so my bad. Still some gorgeous character art in this one. It's just this, which actually I prefer the end papers to this print, but this is the Wren in the Holly Library. I just put it in the wrong book. I am not enjoying the Half King. I'm really sad about it, but I'm just not having a good time. So I've decided that I'm actually going to be DNFing this one at 112 pages, which is chapter 8. I cannot get along with the writing style in this book, and there is nothing about it that is incredibly offensive. I actually just think it is very bland, and it is not gripping my attention at all. My mind is wandering all over the place while I'm reading this book. I do think that the world building and the magic and the history of this world is very interesting, but I think that the delivery of this story and the characters is very lackluster. There is a lot of dialogue throughout here, which I am not the biggest fan of dialogue heavy books. Of course, we need dialogue. I enjoy dialogue in books, but I prefer it to be heavier on the inner monologue and the description than it is the dialogue, and I think we have a lot of dialogue in this one. And I feel like the reveals of the world and the story is just really not compelling, and I have been making not necessarily a conscious effort not to DNF in this series, but if I'm being honest, it has not been challenging to finish the 5 books that I've read for this series so far. So I was on a good run, so I didn't want to DNF to spoil that, but I did say at the beginning of this challenge and throughout that like it's okay if I DNF, it's not that I'm not allowed to DNF. I was just doing so well, but this one is just one that I can't focus on it, and I'm struggling to get through 10 pages. I read 50 pages in bed last night. It is an incredibly quick read. I took Brie out this morning. I listened to about 30 pages in audio while I was having breakfast, and then I've come back to it and I was like, okay, I'll get to page 150. That's around the third of the way through the book, and I'll bring you guys your update. And I just could not make it 15 pages, and yeah, it's not for me. It's just bland is my kind of verdict on it. It's not that it's bad, it's that it's not interesting me at all, which is really unfortunate, but I will let you guys know a little bit about it, kind of up to the point that I got to. We're following this girl who is a priestess. The order in which people are born in this world very much denotes what they do in life. So like the firstborn children of the noble houses and also the royal family all have a curse, and this is because I can't remember how long it is in the history of the world, but the heads of these houses are banded together to try and kill the goddess. However, they failed, and so their family lines were cursed. So our main character, the firstborn of her family, has outstanding beauty, which is of course like it's a blessing, but it is also a curse because she attracts a lot of unwanted attention. People can be very obsessed with her. There is the head of one of the families who has like an unquenchable bloodlust. The prince is cursed to turn into a shadow every night, and by his 21st birthday, like he disappears altogether. So he's like desperately trying to get an heir so that his kingdom is not left without a king on the throne. And all of that I find very interesting, especially because of the reasons why they have these manifestations. The reasons why the firstborns carry the curses they do is tied to the role that they played in the assassination of the goddess. And all of that I found very interesting. The second-born children in this world as well are either given to the priesthood or they become oracles for the goddess. It is a patriarchal society, so the priests have all of the power and the oracles do not have very much. And it actually says in the author letter at the front of this that the author herself was a victim of religious trauma. She grew up in a very strict religious background and she had to unprogram all of this to be able to live a healthy, like normal life. And a lot of that has slipped into this book, so it's very much about how the priesthood have the most power in the world. Even though the deity that they worship is female, all of the power is kind of taken from women and everything is controlled by men. So that is a central theme throughout here. All of that stuff I did find really interesting. I didn't care about any of the characters at all. I felt like they were there just to pass information about the plot and the world. The prince, who's supposed to be our love interest, boring. He's boring. Our main character is fine, and I didn't love it, I'm afraid. It reminds me a lot actually of The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon, which I read that entire thing and I really wish I hadn't. I did not enjoy it at all, but it's that kind of shadow and light parallel a little bit in here and heavily to do with shadows, and also like a not very engaging writing style. The cover as well also reminds me a lot of that one because I had the Fairyloot edition of that as well. So I don't even have
a section on my chart for DNFs. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't tell you anything about the spice rating on this one either, which is one of the reasons why I was low-key avoiding a DNF while not consciously like trying to do that. I would say though, my educated opinion, my assumption based on the 100 pages I read, I would say that this is either a 2 or a 3 chili pepper rating. The letter at the beginning, the author letter, does say that part of this character's journey is going to be sexual exploration after breaking free from this like restrictive religion. So I do know that it is going to get spicy, but at this point, 100 pages in, which is almost a quarter of the way through, there was nothing overtly sexual apart from like a mild description of the fact that the prince was an attractive man. So that would be where I assume it would fall, but I cannot say for sure because I did not finish this one. So in episode 2, have we learned anything about romantasy as a genre? I would say no. I would say right now that romantasy is exactly what I thought that it was. There's no difference between romantasy and fantasy romance. It's just a marketing push from the publishers to try and sell more books and make them appear like a little bit fresher and a little bit new when it's a genre that's existed for a long time. There is nothing out of the ordinary, I would say, in these 3 books. They are all fantasy romance or romantasy, albeit representatives of different subgenres. We had The Wren in the Holy Library, which was more of a contemporary urban fantasy. Bonded by Thorns is a portal fantasy, and then The Half King is solidly a high fantasy. But so far, these did nothing different than I kind of expected them to. Have we learned anything about how I feel about romantasy? I feel like we learned, now that I've introduced a spice rating, which is something I've never done in my channel before, I think that I've learned that I do prefer the 3 chili pepper spice rating. 1 to 2 explicit sex scenes when they are relevant to the character development and the development of their romantic relationship, and when it makes sense for the plot, as opposed to when it kind of becomes the focus of the book. While I do like stories that are very romantic, I do like them to be plot forward. It is a shame because The Half King was definitely seeming like it was heading in that direction to be plot forward. I'm actually going to try and keep track as well of which of the books have more romance than plot, more plot than romance, and also like an even balance, so we can reflect when we wrap up this challenge at the end. But aside from the fact that I couldn't predict any of my thoughts on these, I don't necessarily feel like I'm still undecided about my thoughts on romantasy as a genre in terms of like, do I enjoy it? Do I not? Should I be trying to read more of it? Should I be trying to read less? But I think in terms of what romantasy is, it's pretty much just reinforced my own opinions going into this challenge. But in terms of like the way that this panned out, it was full of surprises. I really did not predict this going the way that it did. I started off by thinking, I guess if we assigned a star rating to them, I thought that The Wren in the Holy Library was maybe going to be a 4. Bonded by Thorns was either going to be a 2 or a DNF. And The Half King could have gone either way, so I was thinking that it might be a solid 3 in my mind. And realistically, my favorite book of this entire challenge so far is Bonded by Thorns, which actually I think could be the surprise of this entire series, because this is the one that I thought was going to be an instant DNF. The Wren in the Holy Library was good and I definitely enjoyed it, but I do feel like it could have done with more development. And I think now that I've taken a few days away from it since I finished it, I can pretty confidently say that I don't think I'm going to be continuing on with this series, which is sad because I did enjoy it, just not enough and not as much as I wanted to. And The Half King, when I heard disappointing reviews of this, I really wanted to be the exception. I so wanted everyone to be wrong about this book, but sadly the writing style is so important for me. If it's a bad book and it's well written, I can read it, but if it's a really good book and it's not well written, I can't make it through because I need to be engaged when I'm reading, and this book sadly was not doing it for me. So that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on the July, August and September Fairyloot romantasy books. Down in the comments, if you have read any of these, please let me know and let me know your thoughts, like whether you agree, whether you disagree, and also if you did make a prediction about what I would think about these in the last video, let me know if you were right or you were wrong, because I think you're all wrong because I was wrong. But I don't know how you guys could have been right. And if you would like more from this series, then stay tuned, because very soon I'm going to be bringing you my thoughts on the October, the November and the December Fairyloot romantasy books as we continue to figure out what the hell romantasy is and whether I enjoy it. Now, in terms of my predictions for these 3, there are 2 of them that I think I'm going to enjoy. There's one that I think I'm going to love. There's one that I really want to enjoy, but I don't know if it's going to be potentially too spicy for me. And there's one that I actually don't have an opinion on. So let me know down in the the comments if you guys can guess which one is which, and also maybe give some predictions about how you think I'll enjoy these three. But that is it from me today, guys. So I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this vlog if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 3. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're ready to go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.